listening to The Career Q, and today we're talking with Michelle Etchart, who is part of the student development team at Seattle University, where she leads professional development programs and innovative efforts in support of students. She has spent 20 years, both professionally and as a volunteer, helping people discern their passion and develop their potential through personal development, training, and skill building. Today, we're going to be talking with Michelle about how to approach your continued professional development.
This is The Career Q, the podcast focused on helping you navigate the signals in your career to keep you growing and moving forward in business and in life. Here's today's host, Dana Redmond.
Michelle, thanks so much for coming in.
Thanks for having me, Dana.
I'm excited. I knew as we started talking about doing the Career Q, and I, had you as a personal friend and somebody we volunteered together, and so I was really excited to have you come in and chat with us about sort of what you do and helping people with their professional development. So thanks for coming in.
Thanks.
So tell us a little bit about your background in professional development.
Sure. I have spent about 20 years working with college students at universities and colleges, doing leadership and personal development with them. And over time, just kind of became that older staff person that was sometimes mentoring others, and that shifted over time into more of a professional development working with my colleagues. So that's actually what I'm doing now, is the professional development work with staff in student development.
That's neat. So tell me a little bit about that transition for you. How did you go from doing student development, which I can imagine is just a little bit different because you're working with young people, sort of learning leadership, to some folks that are more established in their career? How's that transition been for you?
Yeah, it's been about 2 years, and so it still feels pretty new after 20 years of working with mostly students. And some of it happened naturally and just in informal relationships and working with colleagues. We tend to be a pretty collegial, relationship-oriented field. And my supervisor kind of tapped me on the shoulder and said, we really need somebody to do this, and I think you're the right person. And at first, I wasn't entirely sure that it was what I wanted to be doing. And it just was an opportunity I hadn't thought of before. And I think we've probably all had those moments in our lives where somebody looks at us or taps us on the shoulder and says, hey, I think you'd be really good at this, and gets us to think about things in a different way. So it's been a fun adventure, and at a time in my career where I sort of thought I knew what I would be doing. So it's been a fun change.
I definitely want to just dive right in and talk about professional development. So, from a pure skills learning perspective, I can understand, right? A new technology comes out. You need to learn that new technology, whatever. Yeah. But how do I think about it if it's not just a real specific skills basis? Like, where do I even get started? Where can people get started with their professional development?
Yeah, I think it's really with the knowledge of ourselves. So the better we know ourselves, the better we're going to be in terms of identifying where those gaps are in our learning and where we need to grow in development and what will take us to that next level. So there are a number of different kinds of assessments, everything from what kind of breed of dog are you on BuzzFeed to those assessments that are scientifically based, really rooted in psychology, and have some academic work behind them.
So tell me more about that. Like, where do you think assessments can sort of play a role, or where should they maybe play a role in personal development for folks?
Yeah, so a purist might say that your style is your style and it doesn't really change between contexts. I tend to be more of this is an bit of information that we can use to enhance our self-knowledge. So I always tell people to take it with a bit of a grain of salt when you get your results, and to think about, how does this compare with what I do know about myself, how I've experienced myself in multiple situations. Depending on the context, taking an assessment one day versus another day, you might get something that's pretty different. So, and I think that's helpful information too.
Right. So what do I do with that? So, if I've taken, if somebody takes some of the more sort of scientific base, maybe like the Myers-Briggs, or there's the Insights, or there's a number of different ones, right, that isn't necessarily what kind of dog are you, which is fun to post on Facebook.
That is also fun.
Doesn't take me a lot of places if I'm looking to develop myself. What can I do with some of that? When what do people do once they get that information?
Yeah. So one of my favorites is the StrengthsFinder, which is developed by Gallup. And StrengthsFinder has a set of over 30 themes and will give you your top 5. themes when you take the assessment. And a really great starting place for people is to look at that and think, where are the places in my life where I'm using those and really leveraging those and enhancing them? And then where are the places where maybe I can find some opportunities to work on them? And StrengthsFinder really focuses on the positive aspects. So let me look at my strengths and let me find ways that I can use these. I also think that it can tell us some things about what are the sort of next areas of growth. So I often will tell people, so you see your top 5, you look at those, you look for places to leverage those. What would you say would be 6 through 10? So there are areas that I tend to be pretty, I'm using pretty regularly, but maybe if I enhance them a little bit, I could find some opportunities and create some goals around those. I think to have something that's really tangible, whether it's written down or in a phone or, on my calendar that gives me an opportunity to really act on those, I'm much more likely to follow up and do something with it.
Right. I mean, I definitely know from personal experience that I've gone in and I've done these assessments and maybe even there's been a, one-day work training around them and I get all excited about that. And I think, I'm going to do this or I'm going to change or I'm going to, this is a new goal for me to work on my presentation skills or, my storytelling kinds of things. Then I sort of get back into my day-to-day life and I've got to do, the job for which I'm getting paid, let's say, right? So how do you recommend people think about that? Like once you've got this feedback and you have, these things you want to work on, how do people use that? Where do they go from there?
Well, when you take the assessment, I think the most powerful thing you can do is note 2 or 3 things that you want to do to act on it immediately. So pick something that you're going to do in the next week, in the next month, in time frame that you're not going to forget about it. The other thing is that if it's not something that's a habit already, by taking 15 minutes, putting it in my calendar once a week, I use Outlook, have a little reminder, and it dings and it tells me, it's time to look back at this goal, to think about, what's a training I want to go to, or reflect back, did I follow up on that action that I said I was going to take? That the more often that we come back to it, it becomes a habit, and then it doesn't have to be something that I'm thinking about.
Right. I love that. I mean, I know for me, putting stuff in my calendar, I think those are, so key. Everybody sort of has a different way that they manage their to-do list, right? But yeah, if you can put it on, make sure it lands on whatever to-do list, however you manage that, and then get it on the calendar so you get that regular reminder of it. So let's say somebody does want to, they've got, specific areas that they want to work on. Most of us are well out of college. We no longer sort of have access to, I want to take that accounting class, right? Or like, where can, like, as adults, where do we go to find these learning opportunities?
Sure. It's personal development for grown-ups. And we don't necessarily have a curriculum in front of us that is planned for us. So we have to do it for ourselves. And one of the great things is that we have the internet available. And certainly there is a wide range of quality information that's out on the web. But there's some really great, material, I think. Most of us are probably familiar with TED Talks, but there's the TED Ed site where there's curriculum built around particular talks. And I just checked this morning to think of a couple examples. I found some really great lessons on motivation, on psychology around ethics, on public speaking. So not only is there a great expert there to tell us from their perspective, but then there can be prompting questions. So let me reflect on this. What am I getting from this? And take that information deeper. So that's one great thing. And a number of experts have free material out on the web. So this summer, one of the things I was really interested in learning more about was body language and how to use body language intentionally to be more effective in speaking. And it took me 5 minutes to find a couple folks online that had posted free material videos. And then one of them also who's regionally local in Portland, had some training sessions available. So with a little bit of effort, a little bit of homework, I was able to find some good expertise around that as well.
Yeah, that's super compelling, right? And I actually didn't realize that, there's this whole sort of the TED Ed piece to it, the curriculum. You think about it when you walk into a college course or a school course, even in a high school course, right? A teacher would say, here's what we're going to do for the next 12 weeks, and these are the things you're going to learn. But then you get out there as an adult, and you're like, hold on, this feedback I'm getting, and I need to change, or I want to change, or I want to enhance a strength. Mm-hmm. And it's almost like you have to build your own syllabus to a certain extent, right? And then sort of hold yourself accountable.
Right.
To go back in there and do that. And I love the idea that there's a lot of free information online, as well as then so many of these experts do have like one-day sessions, right? Mm-hmm. Or some different things, and even some, continued coaching there from them. I love that. So as a person thinks about they've taken an assessment and they've gotten some areas, and I love the concept of strength finders, right? And they want to continue to push forward on those strengths. And then how can people check in on that? Like, what do you recommend? I mean, because again, we're in a place where, in a professional space, you might get an annual performance review that will give you some feedback, but you're not getting that scorecard or that A, B's, and C's from your professor, or even you're not taking midterm tests to know how am I going to end up at the end. So how can an individual sort of hold themselves accountable? Maybe that's the question.
Yeah. So 2 things I think can be really helpful. One is just making room for feedback and inviting feedback, whether that's from a supervisor or a colleague, the folks that, a customer or client, really creating a space where when I ask you, hey, can I get feedback on this, where it really feels like I actually want honest feedback on that.
Right.
So I think that's one thing. And that's both how we ask the question as well as how we receive it.
Right.
So, it might be habit to say thank you for that. But if what I'm communicating is really, and I don't like that you just said that to me, you're not going to get that feedback again. The other is more of an internal reflection. So working at where I'm in Jesuit education, and there's this concept of the examen. And in the Jesuit tradition, it's a prayer that's done daily. But I know a number of colleagues who are not spiritual or religious use versions of it that are more of a reflection. But it takes us through a recitation or a reflection on the day, and really thinking about, where was I really genuine and authentic and aligned with the kinds of ways I want to be acting and being with people? And where were the places where I maybe didn't hit the mark, where I wish, oh man, in retrospect, I wish I'd done this. And that daily practice, even if it's 15 minutes a day of continually thinking back and then being able to apply that the next day, I think it helps us to become more mindful, more aware. Yeah. So whether it's using something like that or meditation or journaling, but making the space to notice those things and then acting on it really creates a feedback loop where I think it becomes something that we do rather than, again, having to carve out separate time to do.
Right. I like that. And as I think about this, every individual, there's sort of their individual professional development. Mm-hmm. But then most people work on teams or in larger organizations. So sort of in your work, either with your students or with, in your current role, working with the professors and staff at Seattle University, have you seen places where you can do, is it group professional development, or where, maybe these assessments, help the entire organization get better in some way?
Absolutely. I think that using an assessment or just having open conversation can be really helpful to a group. Part of it is it surfaces knowledge that people might not know about each other. So Myers-Briggs is another assessment that folks might be familiar with, and just knowing, for example, is somebody an introvert and they really need that alone processing time. That's where they get their energy, versus somebody who really thrives on being around everyone on the team. Just having that knowledge helps folks interact with each other more positively. It also gives language to talk about things that we don't naturally, I think, talk about in our culture. Yeah. So, if we're kind of bumping up against each other, maybe edging on conflict, and we realize, it's not that the other person is necessarily, incompetent or doesn't know what they're doing, but they're trying to do it in this way, I'm trying to do it in that way. And if we had some language to talk about that, we could probably sort it out and it wouldn't become a conflict. So I've seen in those kinds of ways, in terms of communication, it'd be really helpful. And on the other side of it, just in the pragmatic, how do we deploy our strengths and our resources the best we possibly can, in terms of, this person's super great at this and they're going to organize us, so let's have them do that. It really helps people use their human resources more effectively.
Yeah, that's a super interesting concept, right? To know, in these different strengths, and they may or may not be strengths that are super evident, right? In somebody's, they could be that awesome organizer of something, right, and really good at that, but that's not the role they have at work, and so people maybe don't see them in that light, but that's really a core strength. And so if you've got something going on and you're all pulling together, knowing that, I love that idea. That's interesting.
And it's just not really a cultural norm for us to raise our hand and say, hey, just in case you didn't know this, I'm super great at doing this thing, so let me do this thing. If you have some opportunities to do assessments or trainings or conversations together as a group, then you open up that space and it feels less weird.
Right. And then I think it also gives that back to that common language. That way, if somebody's going out or trying to develop in a way, you can talk to folks about that, right? And say, hey, this was feedback I got, or this is something that came out in this assessment that I'm trying to work on or improve or enhance. And can you give me feedback specifically on that? And so you can ask for some of that, pointed feedback, especially if you've done some development.
Right.
Have I moved the needle, right, on that? People told me I needed to be more authentic in my communication style. Are you feeling that from me? Have I, made the mark? Great. Well, we're going to take a quick break. And then when we come back, I want to talk about how often we should think about our own personal development.
Job search doesn't have to be painful. Plum coaches have more than 20 years of recruiting experience and know how people are hired. Let the experts at Plum Coaching and Consulting partner with you on a modern job search. Visit plumseattle.com today.
Welcome back. We're talking with Michelle Etchart, and we're talking about how people can approach their continued professional development. So as we jump back in, Michelle, I wanted to reflect on, the way you and I know each other is we are both on an advisory board together. Yeah. And this summer you did the Strength Finders for all of us. And it was, an interesting process that all of us coming together as volunteers, we, see each other sort of all together once a month, but we all have different roles that we play on that board. And then, to have that sort of visual of where we all felt. Walk me through sort of your process for why did we do that as a board, and how, where did you think we went with it after that?
I was asked, but seriously, that board is an interesting one. So there are a number of us who have been working with the organization for a while, some who have come in and then come back, and then a few members that are pretty new to the group. And so our chair had asked if there was something that we thought would be helpful to us to just get to know each other better and how to work together a little bit better. And just going back to what we were talking about, that in terms of the understanding and opening up a language that we can use and talk about where we can support each other, where we can collaborate, where we can lean on one another. The Strengths Finder seemed like a really great tool to use. And one of the things that we did, in addition to sharing what our strengths were, how we use them in our roles, was we developed a team map. And that is a nice visual oftentimes for groups to be able to see, oh, wow, we have a lot of strength in this particular area. And then to look at some of those places where thinking, oh, we have nobody on the team that this is their highest strength. Maybe we need to strategize if this is something that we need. Do we need to recruit somebody? Is there somebody who maybe it didn't come up in my top 5, but I have experience and I can absolutely do this, to know who we can lean on. So it gives a little bit more, I think, proactivity to how we operate.
Right. And I do think that, all of, so many people do different volunteer opportunities, right? And it is a great way for people to think about developing their career, developing skills and trying out or strengthening in some area that maybe is in a little bit safer environment, if your paycheck isn't dependent on that kind of thing. So give me your thoughts on that, on volunteer, building skills in volunteering.
Yeah, I think volunteer work should be something that obviously we're doing something to contribute, but there's nothing selfish about trying to work on ourselves in the process. And so I even use the term personal development sort of for grown-ups in how I look at professional development, that if we can find an opportunity to work on something and maybe our workplace isn't going to give us that opportunity, volunteering somewhere where that's going to give us a chance to practice that skill is a great way to develop that. And I think it's usually, as you said, in an environment where maybe it's a little bit safer, that we don't have a paycheck that's attached to it, and is a really fun way to give back as well. So I think the non-paid arena is a really fantastic place to continue to grow as well.
Right. Yeah. And I do think it's so interesting because you can go in to these volunteer opportunities thinking, oh, I'm really good at this. Let me do that. And there's also that thought of, gosh, maybe that's not what I'm so good at. And who on the board is good at the PR piece and and how that's something I want to develop that I think is important for my future career. And that's not going to happen at work necessarily. So let me volunteer to be the PR person for the board, that kind of thing, right? To try some hats on maybe is a good way to, and you might realize like, wow, that is not at all what that sounded good. It is not what I want to do for a career, right?
Yeah. Well, and sometimes in the workplace, people will get pigeonholed, right? So if we're really good at something, often we're going to get asked to do that again and again because we're good at it.
Right.
And it can sometimes be hard to break out of that. So doing something in the volunteer world is a great way to then say, okay, I know I'm good at this. I think I'd be good at this thing, but I haven't tried it yet. So I'm going to do a little experimentation here.
Right.
It gives us a chance then to come back to the workplace and say, oh, I've got some experience in this other thing. I'd really like to do this.
Right. Right. So how often should people be thinking about their personal development? Is this like an everyday, I've got to do my 20 minutes of whatever, is it like the
it would be
3
nice
days
if we
a week
had that
I got to go to
time.
the gym, isn't that I'm supposed to go to the gym 3 days a week, right?
Yeah.
Like how often should people be thinking about their personal development?
I think it's probably like many things. It really depends on the situation and the person and what's realistic. Yes, it would be lovely if everybody had 15, 20 minutes a day to think about this and to reflect on it. And if that's possible, I think it can be a really great tool. Maybe once a week, once every couple of weeks, I think is a good thing to shoot for. And particularly if at the beginning of this we're thinking, okay, how often am I really thinking about this? Is this once a year when I have my annual review?
Right.
Maybe a good goal to shoot for is monthly. That's stretching me, but it's not an everyday kind of thing. So think about your baseline and where you are and try to push that.
Right. And I love that with so much information, as you mentioned, online, you really can go for some quick hits, right?
Yeah.
If you've got an hour once a month, you can carve that out and listen to a TED Talk or, put the books that you want to read, put that on your nightstand and make that intermixed with the more fun books, right?
Yeah.
Slide one of those
After the
in there.
mystery, I'm going to read a personal development book.
Yeah, like kind of pace yourself in that way and just be very purposeful about that, right?
Yeah. And I think to use that, so I'm going to read the material or I'm going to look at this or go to this training and then I'm going to use it. So I'm either going to practice the skill, I'm going to tell somebody about this interesting thing that I just read. It helps us internalize the information more deeply.
Right. Yeah. Figuring out that next step, right? And I do know going to so many training sessions that's often, one of the things they have you do is write down what is that next step that you're actually going to do.
Yes, it's trying to bridge that theory to practice gap, which is really hard for a lot of us. We're at a training, we're really excited about something, and I think, oh, I'm going to use this. And then suddenly it's 3 weeks later, and I think, oh, I found this handout from this thing. I totally forgot about this. So
I always took stuff back to my office, and I'd pin it on my board, and it would sit there, and then stuff would get on, the next thing would get on top of that bulletin board as a
Peel back
office
the layers.
move. And I go, oh, that's right. That was something I wanted to do.
Right. Yeah. So, helping yourself out and creating that step to bridge from theory to practice as soon as you possibly can, even if it's just telling a colleague over coffee, hey, I went to this thing. It was really interesting. Here's the best thing I learned.
Right. Okay. So help me right now. How am I going to bridge this theory to action? Like what is the one thing our listeners can do that they could do this month maybe around their professional development?
Yeah. I think one thing choose one thing that's going to help you deepen your self-knowledge. So whether that's developing a regular reflection practice, taking an assessment, asking a colleague, hey, what's one thing that I could work on to, take my skill building to the next level, just enhance that self-knowledge and then create a goal from that.
I love that. All right. Deepen my self-knowledge. I'm on it.
Good. I'll call you next week, see how
All
you're
right.
doing.
Fine. Yeah. Keep me honest. Keep me honest. Michelle, this has been fantastic. Thank you so much for coming in and chatting about professional development. I just feel it's so important that this is top of mind for folks just as, we get going in life and you want to be able to feel like you've progressed and gone forward. So thank you. And then we always like to round out our conversations here on the Career Q with some fun sort of last bit of questions. So here we go.
Okay.
What was your first job? Tell me about that.
Oh, the first, working at a sandwich shop in my hometown, which was a lot of fun and harder work than it probably sounds like.
So do you think you learned anything from that? Like, what do you take away? What do you think you still use?
Oh, man. I was a teenager, and this was probably, I think about the folks that I worked with. I was working with older people, somebody who was the head baker and had been there, was in her probably 40s, which seemed quite old to me at that time, now being in my 40s, to the other coworkers and the owners. And, they went through a big relationship issue when I was there. I mean, it was very dramatic at the sandwich shop. But I really learned a lot about how to connect with people and people who are in really different places in their life, come from different backgrounds, and we all had a goal together. Right. And I think that was huge for me in terms of learning how to navigate other humans, because we can be messy.
Yes. Well, and it's interesting, right? Then the field that you've gone in your career has been around sort of people development, student development, professional development, right? So that probably, put you on a good starting ground in some of that. Interesting.
And to make a great sandwich.
Ooh, okay. I'm going to hold you to that. So what have you read or listened to recently that you would recommend to others?
Oh, so after listening to this podcast, obviously, the stuff Mom Never Told You podcast, I absolutely love. It's just really, it's very inspiring, and I find often that I'm getting really good nuggets about culture, about gender identity, about empowering others. It's really, really interesting.
Nice. I love that. Okay. Stuff Mom Never Told You.
Yeah.
All right. So here's one of my favorite questions to ask is, what would your 90-year-old self say to you? If that 90-year-old Michelle walked right in the door, what is she going to say to you?
Oh, man. What is 90-year-old Michelle going to say? I think that she's going to say that she's proud of me and that I am a work in progress, and to be patient with that. Yeah.
I love that. Yes, be patient. Like, it will come, right?
Yeah.
And the work in progress, all around that development piece, right? We sort of never stop learning.
Yeah.
It's great. So
absolutely true.
Awesome. Well, Michelle, this has been so great. Thank you so much for coming in and chatting with us here on the Career Q. And for our listeners, be sure to hit us up at thecareerq.com, where you can find show notes and additional information about Michelle. And Michelle, if people want to get in touch with you, what's the best way for them to do that?
Yeah, they can email me at michelle.etchart@gmail.com.
And as always, check out the Career Q on iTunes and leave us a review.
Thanks for listening to today's episode. Be sure to head on over to thecareerq.com, where you can get more information, show notes, and related articles to today's topic. Also, if you like what you're hearing, head on over to iTunes, subscribe to the podcast, and make sure you leave us a rating and a review. We'd love to hear your feedback. Thanks again.
The Career Q podcast is produced by Lens Group Media and recorded at Jack Straw Cultural Center in the lovely Seattle, Washington.